Green.
I've been looking forward to reading this thing all day. Love it. Right. The Tennessee Department of Education is excited to work with you on this opportunity to discuss the state's formula for funding public education. Before we begin, the department would like to remind you of the following. Conversations on this topic are not intended to reflect the current BEP funding formula. The current BEP funding formula will remain in place until a new funding formula is recommended and approved by the Tennessee General Assembly. The public is encouraged to submit comments in writing to ensure that all communications are thoroughly documented and can be reviewed and considered in the future. Public comment is encouraged to focus on developing new funding formula rather than revising the current funding formula. Consider what should be funded in the new funding formula and at what level. Subcommittees will be responsible for reviewing public comment and making recommendations for what should be included in the new funding formula. While all committees, subcommittees, and members of the public should feel free to communicate openly, documents and records may be subject to public inspection pursuant to the Tennessee Public Records Act and may be publicly posted or otherwise made available. All recommendations that are submitted by committees and subcommittees will be reviewed and considered, but not all recommendations will ultimately be included in the proposed new funding formula.
Congratulations. Great one. We'll hit this for just a moment, just to let you know, in the update section, that fourth bullet down, steering committee has met. Those are the recommendations we'll see in the policy section of our work that we can get started on today and wrap up next week. New resources were added to your Google Drive, including public comment. So that drive is full. And the draft formula, draft framework, is in there for you. And quickly, meeting number 5, we're just going to look for comparison. Meeting number 6, wrap up. And just to let you know, these are our next meeting details. We will meet next Monday, which is literally you get the weekend, and that's it. We'll meet on Monday again, back to our original time for our last meeting, 12 o'clock Central, 1 o'clock Eastern. You do have that invite for Microsoft Teams. And I'm going to quit sharing this screen and pop up the other two. Any questions before we dive in? Okie doke. All righty, so let's see. Meeting 4 and the draft. Oops. Okay, you should be able to see my full screen at this time. And left-hand side is the recommendation list that we did for meeting number 4, the formal one that went over to the commissioner's office. Remember, anything that's in the draft framework is a consolidation of all of that feedback, as well as feedback from the public, and all that's been consolidated. The steering committee has made these recommendations. So that's on your right-hand side. So I'm going to go ahead and scroll on down. Here is the base. These were the things that were discussed and then added for formal recommendations, meeting number 4. I am going to go ahead and let you know on this. So I'll pull our topic of conversation up to the top of the document. So it does go in the same order: base, weights, which is longer, direct funding, and outcomes. One of the things that we should probably point out at this point is there is a chunk called additional considerations supported by subcommittees. So many subcommittees that have met this week, as they have discussed what's on their document and looking at it, to see if there's reflection of their recommendations into the draft framework. Many of those pieces are actually right here. So know that they're there. May not necessarily be represented verbatim up here in the actual framework components. Also know that this has been a topic of conversation, district-specific needs. Like, what is that? That question has been asked already by many committees. So know that the plan is to think about a more detailed definition for that. What all does it entail, or is it just the kind of the outcome of a flexible funding formula? So if an LEA actually does need to spend on something very unique, is this a pot of money? So don't have to worry about spinning your wheels and spending time there today. All right, so I'm going to go on mute. Jared, I'll hand it over. This is the base. Tell me when you need me to scroll, and we'll just hop in.
Yeah, so this is a time that we're going to refine some of these if we feel like they need to be refined, or if there's other feedback that we want to give. So is there anything, I know we've had this for a little over a week, but is there something you feel like that stands out to you that is either missing or that you want to talk about more in these big buckets? Again, all this is sort of conceptual right now with no dollar figures, so really just looking at the framework still. And Jamie, let me ask you this: is there a timeline or a thought process on when some dollar figures will be applied to this, or percentages, or something, anything like that we could expect?
Yes, so you are likely going to hear my 4-pound warrior over there barking. Yes, of course, the 31st is State of the State address, and that's when the governor will announce dollar amounts. And
Okay.
a little sidebar, everyone on subcommittees is invited to attend. Do not let me forget to mention that before we hop off today.
Okay, thank you.
Which then lends it to, currently it is a framework, not a formula.
Yeah. So we'll just go section at a time. If there's not any overall concerns or overall feedback or anything anybody has, we can go a section at a time. So is there anything in general you want to bring up or talk about? All right. Well, then let's look at the base. Anything that I think, this, most of what, or if not all the things that we had highlighted and talked about in our recommendations is reflected here, based on all the final round of input. So anything you would think needs editing, changing, more discussion? We're gonna have to light a fire under, or maybe everything's just great and we just we move on. So that's what we're going. If all hearts and minds are clear as we go through these sections, we'll move through them and we'll get on into the policy stuff. All right. Well, nobody has anything on the base. Scroll on down, Jamie. What about the weighted formula? That section. Okay. The direct funding section.
So let me ask a question on the weights. So when it talks about, heavy, moderate, light, are they going to try to include everything in the weights, and it's just based on your feedback you're receiving as whether this kind of floats to the top or not, or like for charter schools where it says light weight, what does that specifically mean?
So
go ahead, Jamie.
Go ahead. So think of this as kind of a way to really disperse those funds. I mean, it is kind of, I think one of the things we think here is what does it really actually mean? But we know that heavy means that the weighted area for poverty and concentrated poverty would get more funds in that bucket than, say, the charter schools, which get a light amount of those funds. So within the weighted category, those are then broken into how much of that is actually pulled.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So think of like a big weight versus a smaller weight, light and heavy, either way.
Okay.
Bigger chunk, smaller chunk.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Sure.
I also had a question about weights from our members here at the Chamber in Nashville. One was equity. And one of the comments that Ralph had said that equity has come up as a question, but how is it related to the urban and rural areas? And how does it address achievement gaps?
Well, as far as, so I think that's probably a multifaceted question. So I'm going to try to approach it in a couple different chunks. So Renee, what I'd ask you to do is just steer me if I'm going off the rails. So particularly when we're talking about policy, once we get down to policy, we'll see that some of those pieces, particularly when we're talking about economically disadvantaged, those types of things, those are of course are all going to play into our definition of rural. As far as when we talk about right up here, our the academic success for our poverty and concentrated poverty. Title, of course, is as part of that. I mean, Jared, feel free to hop in here as well. I mean, particularly when we're thinking about our unique learning needs, those are all, when we're talking about here's our data that we're going to use. I'm trying to highlight as I go. So we're thinking about achievement gaps there as well.
Yeah, I think some of this is hard to discuss too much without actual numbers being put to it. I mean, as I get feedback from our members and other people I've talked to in my network, I haven't talked to anyone that has not agreed that a weighted system makes sense and it'll help some students in areas of equity and achievement gap areas. But it's hard to carry the conversation, I think, that next level until somebody can actually see an example of what that looks like. Like, okay, is it a multiplier system? If you're in a rural school, you're going to get 1.3, multiplier or something like that. And I don't know. I think I know there's a rural committee, and I've talked to some of those folks. But as a member of the Tennessee Rural Ed Association board, I know one thing that has come up with our membership and board members is what definition of rural will be used. If you go by the national definition, there would be several counties or districts, I should say, across Tennessee that we all would definitely consider as rural, but by the national definition, wouldn't be considered rural. So is it going to be, where are we going to pull some of these definitions from, even with, urban core and things like that? So I don't know if there's necessarily any changes or anything we would make. I think it's going to be hard to carry this part of the conversation further until some numbers are put to it, I think.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's fair.
I agree with that. That was the same reaction we had here, is until we see numbers, it's really hard for us to judge.
And so the thinking that at this point it's about, are the right topics, are the right categories represented in the framework?
Yeah, I think so.
Mm-hmm. And we will, once we get down into the policy section, we can have, much deeper conversations about definitions and or those types of things we feel strongly need to be part of. There's some guiding questions that lead us. What are some things that need to be part of policy around a specific topic?
Okay. Any other comments, questions on the direct funding section, or wait before we keep scrolling? All right. Next one, outcomes. Anything there? We really didn't spend as much time on this section. I know we did some of the others. I don't know what the other subcommittees you've been working with, Jamie, but I think this is something else that's hard to really define when you don't have some either percentages or numbers that you're talking about.
The biggest conversation has really been about growth, making sure to include growth, not just achievement.
All right. Well, we can move on now to the.
Okay, so I'm going to close out the one for 4. I can bring it back up if we need to in a little bit. And I'll grab us 5. So what you'll see here on 5 is that, oh, excuse me, got a little fast. Here were these sections. So all I'm going to put in this point at this point is, no further recommendations or clarifications for these 4 chunks. And then here we are at policy. So the first 3, Jared and I talked about these earlier today in our planning call, but these are definitions. And then, as I mentioned earlier, you'll see that from here on out, it's the topics on the left-hand side, and then on the right hand in the column is a guiding question. So a couple of things the commissioner would really like for us to prioritize is any type of feedback we could provide around the outcomes section in the policies considerations, CTE, and teacher salaries. We did talk earlier about the definition of ED, which currently is direct cert. We've had a lot of consistent feedback there. We can touch it here if we'd like to or move on, but the feedback has been pretty consistent around including other things such as free and reduced lunch. Concentration of poverty and definition of sparsity. Those haven't gotten as much attention just because a lot of folks just haven't gotten to it this week, but we can hop in wherever you feel comfortable. We do not have to do it from top to bottom. We don't have to go in order. These are also in your Google Drive if you feel more comfortable pulling them up on your end and looking through them. That way you don't have to depend on me to scroll.
One question that might be good to ask just for clarity when we're thinking about the weight and as it relates to policy, if you had a weighted formula for students that are economically disadvantaged, is it just solely going to be based on the school that they attend, or individual students could get additional dollars even if they're not in a Title I school? Like if their family's economically disadvantaged, then, and how is that, just free and reduced lunch students, or how would that maybe capture that? But is that something that's being talked about, that the weights wouldn't necessarily just be school-wide, it might be individual students?
Mm-hmm. And that's even up here in the outcome section is additional weight for economically disadvantaged. Then it's also up here in our weighted section around our poverty and concentrated poverty. So our ED students here. So I think over here, just, so Jared, is it that there's a
I
need?
guess just clarity. I just want to make sure, because if people are looking at this and they're not familiar with any of this process, and they hear weighted and they see Title I school, that like currently attending a Title I school, are only those students in a Title I school with the weight apply to them, or if a student is in an economically disadvantaged home, and like then that weight's going to be for that individual student, not because there's a lot of kids that are socioeconomically low, their home is, but might not go to a Title I school. And not just with the economically disadvantaged. I'm just using that as an example. It might be something else, but maybe just worth being clear that it's not just school based. It's individual student demographics. Because I'm just saying, because I've been asked a couple of times by people, so I know this isn't necessarily for public consumption, but maybe just helping us keep on track in our frame of reference. Well, we got a quiet group today.
Right there.
Either we've done a good job up to this point, or overwhelmed and don't know where to start. I'm not sure. Anybody, anything else? And you said the commissioner was particular. Which categories? Just to remind everyone.
She really just wanted to make sure that we did at least dig in. If we had to prioritize, we would dig into outcomes, CTE, and teacher salaries. So the teacher salary, there are two questions here. The first one is, what, if any, requirement should the formula require on investing new education dollars into existing educator salaries moving forward? The second one, are there any other policies for teacher salaries that should be included? So the first one is taking new dollars and putting those into existing salaries.
Yeah. Well, I think one thing, just personally, as a former teacher and educator family, I think we kind of nibble around the edges at increasing teacher salaries without making a significant jump. And I know it's probably our biggest expenditure within the education budget, but I think if our expectation is to be in the top half of the country in achievement, that we need to be in the top half of the country or better in teacher salaries. So personally, when it comes to teacher salary, I think I like the word significant increase, not just increase. We always do like 2% or 1%, and I don't think that gets us where we want to go if we don't do something significant. But anyone else, feel free to push back on that.
No, I completely agree with that.
I think those core office directors' job, they ought to double those salaries.
Right.
Woo, facts.
I'm guessing that folks in the business community would look at that question, and some or many of them might respond by saying that the formula should require new dollars to be either flow exclusively to or be weighted in favor of new support for educators who are, I don't know how to put this, but the ones that are fives or fours, not the ones who are ones and twos. in terms of the teacher's performance, meaning that any new investment of new dollars should attach somehow, or should attach somehow to the the teachers that have demonstrated good performance. Yeah, however that's measured. There's some measurement of teacher performance.
Like a TIF, like incentive pay. That might resonate in the business community, but I'll tell you right now, the educators will be clamoring. And I get what you're saying, Pat. I understand what you're saying. We went down that TIF road, about 10 years ago. That was an interesting time.
I think it's important to make sure that we're progressing teacher salaries both with the entry level and veteran teachers. I don't know if that can be mentioned.
Would you say that one more time, please? I'm sorry.
Yeah, I didn't catch it.
To make sure that we're progressing teacher salaries both for the entry level and for veteran teachers.
And maybe some of the wording in there about like to meet or exceed national averages, because I know we're way behind, and again we have been beating the drum of accountability, like just like Pat's talking about. We want good teachers be rewarded and incentivize that work. And we talk about Tennessee, we want to be one of the national leaders, but yet our investment in education is definitely not even at the national average. We're what, 46, 47, something like that.
I can appreciate what Pat said, but at the same time, if we are trying to attract the caliber of teachers that we need in our education system, I think we need to look at the overall salaries, because teachers need to be able to, make a living wage, and be paid comparable to what they would make in other fields in order to, consider that profession.
I'm just typing as you talk. You all just tell me when and where, what to add, delete, anything.
I would also say something I've heard over the last year in particular is that the role of compensation in LEA's ability to attract and retain CTE teachers or instructors in particular is a particularly large problem.
Yes, I agree. I've heard the same thing.
Especially because, that's the LEAs are having to compete with the private sector. And, this even extends to the post-secondary level, not for, a formula conversation, but, I asked TCAT presidents, how much more would it take, for you to be able to offer a salary that's fully competitive with what CTE instructors that you're looking at could make in the private sector? And the answer was it would have to go up at least 30, if not 50%.
Yeah.
So just as a proxy for what that size of that problem might look like in K-12, I would suggest that from the business community standpoint, what I'm able to, report in, I would guess that a lot of our constituents would want to aim some of this additional support that could be provided under a potential new formula directly to aiming it at the CTE instructor gap, if you will, that's being experienced by LEAs.
And we might put something in there like supplemental or salary supplements, like we do coaches and other staff within education when they are, because exactly what you're saying, Pat, I hear that all the time. It's hard to get somebody from industrial maintenance background to teach, come be an instructor for $45,000 a year when they're making $75,000 to $90,000 in the industry.
And to add to that, we might have the interest, maybe they are interested and have a passion for it, but then we make it so difficult for them to be able to be in the classroom, the courses they have to take, the additional training, things like that comes out of their pocket to do. So I think that's, to add on there. I know on the recording, they had mentioned some things about adjunct, opportunities and throwing that idea out there. But I think that's a lot too. You may find someone who's retired or just wanting to, get the different schedule and things, but then it's very difficult to get them certified and ready to go. And even throughout the long period of time they have.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, very much so. We've been experiencing that just over the past couple of weeks here with certain CT programs that we are having. And we have had to scramble. It has not been a good thing for our welding students in particular. So we are finding it very difficult to get the teachers to want to be able to teach with the salary conversation that we've already had, but being able to go through all the hoops that they have to do to even be in the classroom. It's been a scramble for us.
The same notion might be also said to apply also to attracting people with the appropriate skill sets to be employed as academic and career counselors as well. Just a suggestion.
Trying to figure out the best place to put that one.
Maybe under any other policies.
Yeah. I'm just gonna have to make this fun. Pat, was it competitive salaries to attract those who have the skill set? Is that?
I think you're in the ballpark. I'm trying to, let's replay the tape. Find out what I said. What I'm trying to capture is the recognition that also, similar to the CTE conversation about attracting instructors, attracting counselors, you would think requires a counseling and or human resources skill set that might carry some additional education requirements and therefore cost requirements for employing somebody with that skill set. That's a really long way of putting it, but
I like that, Pat, about the HR background and with the career counselors. That would be an excellent mix.
Yeah. Isn't that kind of the skill set that we're after for people that we want to be counseling our kids starting in middle school to say, hey, here's how you figure out what, where your aptitudes and your interests intersect and how you might think about pathing for the rest of middle school and going into high school?
So, I have never thought about that, but it really is a lot of it because I would know what to look for and things and be able to tell you. I've never really put that two and two together. So
it's the same thing that, in the business constituency, in the business community, the larger companies have dedicated people who do that function in terms of organizational development and talent development, not necessarily talent acquisition. That's a little different, but, I'm thinking of the organizational development and training people and, how they look at, they're developing their core of their entire employee core, on the macro levels. That's a skill set that you just, you can't hire away from Hardee's, to pick on Hardee's. Well, I don't know, maybe, but
So here was a section of the framework down in that paragraph for additional considerations supported by subcommittees about career coaches. So it,
that's sort of in that ballpark, the same ballpark, yeah.
mm-hmm. And then I know earlier we mentioned overall salaries.
Yeah, that says that reference there is to career coaches. I would, you know, and that's good as far as it goes, but I think it needs to marry the idea of the person has to be, the persons that we want for those positions have to be equipped not only to say, oh, hey, this is a great career for you, but also to be able to say, okay, and then we translate that career into here's what the academic path for you might look like in middle school / high school, and be able to not only identify on the future career, but then also sort of bring that back forward through the pipeline to the present for students to be able to effectively guide them as to here's what you do next. If you want to end up at B, we're at A, here's what the path looks like between A and B.
Pat, I'm in total agreement of that. I mean, students, I've got a sophomore right now that we're working on career pathways, so to speak, and that's questions he has. You know, if I want to go this way, why do I need to take this course? What's the significance of it? Where is that leading me to? What is next? And so students are asking those type of questions. They want to know that. So they've got to be able to do just both things. I mean, I've
got a sophomore in my house, Laura, who has figured out that she wants to do bioengineering, but I don't know that she's receiving the counseling support from a professional in her institution, where we'll be able to say, okay, here's exactly the path that you would need to take for academically to get there.
Right.
It's where when you hit 12th grade and you exit into whatever post-secondary is coming for you, here's how to get appropriately ramped for that.
Sure. We're in totally the same boat right now.
So we can continue here, or we can head down here to the outcomes. There are 2 questions related to outcomes.
Hang on, let's look at that first question. They would like to see outcomes options for middle school. What outcomes does your subcommittee recommend? Ooh, that's a good one.
Mm-hmm. I can go back up here to the outcomes section right here. That's it that I just highlighted. I'm not going to keep it highlighted. It's harder to read.
It's tricky because some of the potential outcomes in thinking about it at middle school level might attach to inequitably to the abilities of different LEAs to do different things based on the resources that they've got. Some are going to have some CTE programming that's rather robust at the middle school level, and other districts aren't going to be able to really afford that considering their own resource base, notwithstanding whatever the new formula does. Another thought I have is I don't know if there's even, is it too much of a stretch? Is it too much to put on them where I'm looking at the pieces of the Ready Grad indicators in the outcomes section on the right-hand side, and I'm looking at the ACT and SAT, and I'm wondering, is middle school too early to take the pre-SAT or whatever? I'd be looking at Jared and some other people who are more knowledgeable about education. But I mean, is that something we want them to do? And is it even fair to say, that should be an outcome that the formula aims at the middle school level? I'm just spitballing here.
I don't know about a requirement. I mean, because we're already got so many assessments we're doing in that age range. But one thing I would like to see in middle school, I thought we had talked about it, but I don't see is to your point, Pat earlier about career exploration.
I was just going to go there.
I think there needs to be
Some sort of a benchmark or an outcome or something that happens on the exploration or career awareness, something, some sort of marker that would be appropriate, I think, for the middle school level.
So I'm going to kind of give you all a little heads up. Our school superintendent is working with one of our local legislators right now to propose legislation that CTE, career exploration, some sort of test or some sort of something be given to all middle school students to be able to allow them to be able to see if that's their career pathway that is fit for them or interesting for them, so that we can kind of develop that going into high school. So they're working on drafting that piece of legislation now.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I wonder about the chicken and egg part of this, though, is that when we're considering policies that have to do with outcomes, are we talking about we want the LEA and or the school to have executed certain outcomes with regard to awareness or exploration and careers in middle school as a condition of getting enhanced funding of some sort? Or are we thinking about, because I think that might be what we're talking about, but it would seem that you'd almost need to have the funding to support that, to achieve that outcome. So I can't, I'm struggling with if it's fair to say, hey, you got to hit X, Y, and Z before you get extra incentive money, or whether it's better or more fair to say state policy ought to support that on the front end.
Yeah, and Jamie reminded me that we've got the plan and explore assessments for students. And I mean, a lot of this boils down to how much capacity the schools themselves have to actually act on the information. I mean, we can do these assessments, career assessments all day long, and aptitude assessments, but if they can't actually make a plan, which goes back to having career coaches of some kind or counselors.
And I think for me, when I think about this, there's so many wonderful resources out there. There's so many programs that you can use. We've different ones to take career assessments to, allow you to track your students and things. If we had some type of, okay, this is the decision, or maybe this is what we would like for everyone to use for, I don't know, pilot something, I don't know, but be able to track and know, okay, this percentage of Tennessean 7th graders are interested in this type of career path. But then to take it, of course, that would be something to have, but then also at your local level, of course, it's going to be different because not everybody's going to have the same programs. I mean, with our system, each high school has different CTE programs. We're working toward, making that a little bit more universal, but just the thought of with the middle schools. And also I noticed like with literacy is that when I think about literacy, also financial literacy, that's a big key thing that beginning in middle school, transferring in. So,
Wow.
How to marker that.
That's something we've looked at too. And one of our members has observed that, and he has some background with this, that the financial literacy curriculum in the middle grades in Tennessee could stand some serious improvement. And I think that's probably a separate conversation from this particular thing that has to do with the formula and the funding based on some outcome. But I just wanted to put that in there for the record too. And two, if we're talking about basing funding on some sort of outcome or some sort of benchmark for career exploration, I would argue that from the perspective of the business community, what we'd probably prefer is that to be more heavily weighted toward measuring or getting something done with regard to developing or aptitude or awareness of aptitude rather than awareness of interest. I would think it's more important for middle schoolers to discover first what they're good at, so that that can inform their interest rather than the other way around. Because interest is kind of subjective, but aptitude is more objective, at least in my view.
Well, we used to have the youth science that was in the budget, and it's not in there anymore. I'm not sure why. I mean, because it's the only assessment I know of that does both. Is you know.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
think we still had a lot of districts across the state too using something different, so it made it difficult.
Yeah, here in Nashville, we use the youth science as well for our MNPS schools, and it has been a really good indicator of aptitude. I had a note, strong proponents of the financial literacy as well, and think that students need to start that sooner than later.
Yeah, because the financial literacy that whole awareness, that drives not only good financial decisions, it can also be a component of how they're viewing career interest as well, and the importance of getting somewhere with figuring out where their interests and aptitudes intersect, and doing something about that sooner rather than later. You know, we seem to have the phrase sooner rather than later pop up quite a bit in this conversation. And financial literacy knowledge is also sort of a proxy for making good life decisions that have big impacts later, such as, avoiding taking on excessive student debt later on, after you exit K-12 and things like that. And, borrowing money for ongoing expenses rather than for capital expenses, or, just stuff that you want versus stuff that you need. Those are all sort of trapdoors that students or people who have, recently become ex-students often fall into in their immediate post secondary years, that, get them off the path of college completion or even enrollment for that matter.
Mm-hmm. I fully agree. The foundation, I mean, a child can test well, and that's wonderful, but be able to have that foundation and be able to make good life decisions and be a productive citizen, and we all know it kind of keeps the wheel going. So I think that that's something that's so important, is financial literacy. And just like you said, of course, like with starting sooner than later, and be able to build that foundation. So yeah, I definitely agree.
And the other side of that, I think, is that they're taking that information home to their families, which could impact some of the decisions that are being made in our homes.
That would be what we want to happen sooner rather than later.
All right. Any other thoughts in this area? I mean, or any other questions or thoughts about what we've talked about so far? I'd rather not go on to a new section. It's only got a few minutes left. And I did want to find out, because I've talked to some of our members and some other folks that are interested in this process, and just the timeline that this is being crafted. Is there any worry that we had the capacity to make really good informed decisions? Was it a little information overload, or just how do you feel? I want to make sure as a committee that we've done our due diligence and presented to the best of our ability the recommendations that we've made. So any process worries or anything? We only got one meeting left, so now's the time if there's a process issue that we need to address.
I'm glad you brought that up, Jared, because something that one big thing, and I don't know if it fits anywhere in here, but the notion that there's an expectation, at least among a lot of stakeholders I've talked with, that this whole process that we've been going through as a subcommittee, which is the let's sift through and categorize and make decisions based on a lot of information that's been solicited from Tennesseans on the front end about what they think should be funded. There's an expectation that's concurrent to that sort of process, that sort of stakeholder engagement and solicitation of input should also happen once we get a formula to look at. They want to be able to say, well, we've been heard on the front end, but now we want to take a look and make sure that the formula that's being proposed is actually responsive, that we can understand it, and that it's responsive to the things that we were thinking about or said during the run up to the development of the framework and then the formula. I don't know if I'm articulating that well, but
yeah, you articulate it better than I do. I guess to put even finer point on it, maybe after we've gone from the conceptual, which I know that's what we weren't asked putting numbers on anything, but once we move from concept to actual, well, here's some percentages and numbers that we would apply to a formula, is there going to be an opportunity to take a look at it then, the final product, and give feedback, or is it just the expectation for all the subcommittees is just concept?
I'll add on to that too. We're in complete agreement. Our stakeholders feel that this process has happened really fast, just so far, and I hope that when numbers are put to it, there is more time for feedback and discussion. That's a concern. The timeline is a huge concern, and as well as the fact that some districts may lose their funding and that they have been getting in the past as part of this new formula. And so that's a big hope, is that no districts are going to be penalized through this process.
I've heard pump the brakes. It's better to get it done right than to get it done fast, if there's a choice that needs to be made between those two things.
Could echo in there, we've said this before, but with the surpluses that we're having as a state, there's no reason or justification at all that any district would take less money. That shouldn't even be in the realm of possibilities.
Anybody else have any comments or thoughts on process? Well, look, we got 4 extra minutes. That, Jamie, I don't know about you. I'm hesitant to dive into another category with only a few minutes left, but
Yeah, I think just ensuring that everybody feels comfortable with the document. I have gone ahead and added in the 4 the 4 boxes up at the top, the table at the top, excuse me, no further recommendations or clarifications. I have added these 2 questions, concerns, a question mark. Will there be time to make final recommendations and or provide feedback after dollars are attached? And ensure no districts will be penalized by the new formula. No to less money. And again, pipe in anytime we're looking through this and tell me to change. I'm just your fingers today. Clarify individual student based, or is it school based for ED? Teacher salaries, ensure a significant increase in educator salaries New dollars flow exclusively to or weighted for teachers that have a demonstrated higher performance. I know that was on the table for discussion. Keep it or cut it.
That's Pat's baby. If he feels passionate about it, we.
Progressing teacher salaries, both entry level and veteran teachers, to meet or exceed national levels. Consider overall salaries, competitive salaries to support recruitment and retention of CTE teachers, and competitive supplementary salaries such as coaches. Industry. We didn't think anything else for teacher salaries at this point. Doesn't mean we won't next week or on Monday. CTE competitive salaries to support recruitment and retention of CTE teachers. And then a little bit on outcomes for middle school, benchmark marker for middle school career exploration, measuring awareness versus aptitude. Awareness of aptitude versus interest, and a benchmark marker for financial literacy and start early.
Can we add one other thing to the questions concern piece?
Sure.
I can't believe I hadn't mentioned this before, because I get this question all the time. What does a sustainability plan look like once the final version is out and we're applying percentages and numbers? And to Brian's point about, we got all this money, extra money right now, especially from ESSER funds that have trickled down. And I mean, we could do all kinds of cool things for 2 or 3 years, but what are we going to do? So what's the sustainability plan for a new formula? I mean, is it, I know that not as big of a deal right now with the extra dollars, but something's going to either lose in some category or something's going up in another category as far as taxes or something like that. So I get that question a lot.
And related to that, a question that has come up is, it's been mentioned that the idea that some of the currently available time-limited ESSER funding can be utilized to help districts transition to the new formula. How much money and how exactly is that going to be applied? That relates to the sustainability idea that Jared just referenced, because the ESSER money is temporary and it's federal, it's not state, and it's not recurring. So if we're being told that we need to do this now so that we can use some of this federal ESSER money to help with the transition to a new formula, somebody's got to explain that in terms that stakeholders can fully understand.
Yeah. And I almost want to kind of highlight the question about, will we have an opportunity to reconvene as a subcommittee once numbers are applied to this? Because our reputations honestly are on the line as people have helped give input and craft a new formula, but we've done so conceptually without actual dollars and cents. So I don't want, this time next year, somebody, superintendent, seen me on the sidewalk trying to run me over because he said, yeah, that's a guy that helped, with the new formula.
I mean, because the solicitation process for the review of the BEP was supposed to be a 90-day exercise. There's some expectation that, figuring out whether or not the new formula hits the stuff that's needed. I mean, how long that may require quite a bit of time in order for, Tennesseans and all different stakeholders to really get into, and understand the new formula proposal to the point where everybody can get behind it.
I just feel like we're all putting our names to something. I want to at least have opportunity once numbers are applied to say, yeah, this is what we were thinking, or we think this is a good idea, or, conceptually this looked great, but these numbers don't make sense. If you understand what I'm saying.
I've got a quick question when we're talking about, we've all kind of consistently had the same message through this whole process that, it kind of takes time. We don't really know because we don't know numbers. And now that we hopefully will get numbers soon, will we be able to review? I'm curious as to other subcommittees expressing the same thing, or is this just unique to us? Like, I'm curious as to, are others feeling the same as we are?
So I facilitate 4 subcommittees, and so far, this is the only subcommittee to request anything afterwards. I
Okay.
don't know about the other, the other 14.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Just curious.
Yep. That's a great question. I'm really curious too.
Hey, we're the courageous subcommittee, Laura.
I guess you could call it that.
I think so.
I mean, just thinking from a implementation side, seems like state leadership, commissioner, and the governor's team, the governor would want the people that have been involved in this process to have that opportunity to give some kind of feedback or just convene again once the numbers are applied to it so we can endorse it. That would be a big thing for me if I was trying to completely reinvent and our biggest expenditure as a state and probably our most important expenditure. If you want to have to sell it at some point, and it's hard to sell if we said, well, yeah, we were in on the concept, but we really, when they put numbers to it, we didn't have an opportunity to give feedback.
I couldn't put that better. That captures that quite, and I think it's really important.
Totally agree. Because I mean, obviously the people in our districts know that we're serving on committees, right? Because we've been talking to them, they've been giving us feedback, and so it'd be kind of the same concern as they're going to come back to us and be, if they're not happy, and we're going to have to answer for that in some way, shape, or form.
Or that they don't understand.
Right.
And, they don't want to say, well, a lot of folks would say, it's not fair to ask me to, endorse something that I don't understand. I need to be able to understand it.
Agreed.
So, Jared, what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and email this to you for your final approval, so I can send it on over to the commissioner's team. And I will PDF it, and I'm going to put it in the meeting number 5, Google Drive folder. I'll likely also move it over to meeting number 6 because it's where we'll kind of take off next go round, and we'll just pick up right where we left off.
Right. Thank you so much, Jamie. You've been awesome helping facilitate this.
Yes, thank you, Jamie.
Absolutely. Been such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Y'all have a good weekend.
You too.
Stay warm. See you Monday.
Y'all too.